and welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. My name is Jed, and today we are doing philosophical midwifery. So, at the time of the recording, the American presidential race has finished, and Donald Trump, who we are recognizing from our reading, clearly is a personification, almost cartoonish personification of what we are reading about the pathologos. He has won. He's beaten Kamala Harris, who themselves were representing pathologos too. They didn't campaign on any significant change. They campaigned on we have good vibes. Just trust us, bro. Even though they were engaged in supporting a genocide, which nobody wanted. Well, most people didn't want, which is clearly a other clan, other families, other cave, bad and wrong mentality. Clearly, they are just supporting the status quo that supports their little family clan of rich people. So they didn't offer anything progressive. There was no logos in them. And again, almost cartoonishly wheeled out Dick Cheney and Dick Cheney's daughter, who are terrible fascists and hated and like a cartoonish personification of the boss of Darth Vader and the Emperor of Star Wars. Like, you can't get much more of a personification of evil. And yeah, we support this Democrat side. I don't know what they were thinking, and of course there are a lot of problems, but this is a big issue because Donald Trump didn't hide the fact that he was a fascist, that his campaign was, hey, don't you hate the same things I hate? He was openly pathologos. This is it. The worst of humanity I represent. Don't you like that? Wouldn't you like to have an opportunity to, as we've seen here, inflict punishment on those who are different than you? Yes, of course, we're human beings. We have pathologos. That is the cause of human problems. So the real issue is, first of all, why are there no social institutions that can maturely and rationally address this problem? The problem that human beings are governed by this worst impulse, and the worst of all human beings, like Donald Trump and people who like that guy, even more so. And you can be bound in groups that share a kind of, as we read last time, a kind of way of being, group identity, roles, way of expressing oneself, way of showing oneself. All of these things are offered by within a group that is bound together in such a way. Why, if this is so obvious and clear to us, and we're only 30 pages into the book, why do we not have institutions that recognize this, anticipate this, and have the conditions in place to prevent it from causing damage and harm? A big problem. And equally so, on the Democratic side, why didn't they also address their pathologos? Many people's pathologos was on display. The pathologos of Joe Biden, who is himself very right-wing, even though he claims to be on the left side, really shows you where humanity is at right now. Why did he stay in the race for so long, even though he was clearly impaired and disliked and an easy target for a bully like Trump? Why did they put Kamala Harris in? Why didn't they put someone who had some popularity, who actually did try to make things better? Why did they just put in a fascism light or status quo person? What happened to Bernie Sanders? What happened to some sort of what do they call it? A pre-election thing where you can pick whoever's going to represent your party? Primary. Why didn't they do that? All of these sorts of things, obvious problems reflecting their own pathologos. Why didn't they have, if they're supposed to be the left or the progressive or the good guys representing the progression, which is the logos, why didn't they have anything in place to address their own pathologos, number one, and why didn't they have anything in place to understand what is actually progression? If they look over the aisle and see, oh, hang on a second, these people have terrible racist, sexist, fascist beliefs, and that's what they're running on. Maybe we have also false beliefs. How do we go through the process of understanding our false beliefs so they don't get in the way of our success? And secondly, how do we move from our beliefs to actual understanding about what's actually good and progressive? Why didn't they do any of that? Why were they so ignorant and confidently ignorant that they know what's best when they were running against someone who equally was saying, I know what's best, and was just as ignorant, or more ignorant than them, of course, but was making the same claim? Why did they lack any sort of integrity, maturity, and rationality to reflect on themselves, especially since they were staring in the face of someone who was telling them, hey, this is what happens if you don't, A, address your false beliefs, specifically your pathologos, and B, do the work in finding out what's true. So, really, it's a characterization or representation of what we are facing within our souls and where humanity is right now. You can't just do nothing because you're not doing nothing. You are allowing your pathologos to take over your life and ruin your life. That's the left. Now, the right, they don't even care about doing better. They don't care. They're all about the pathologos. That was their whole campaign. We hate women. We hate immigrants. We hate poor people. Don't you want to be in the team that hates? Don't you want to be the bullier instead of the bullyee? Because that side doesn't offer a third option. So you can say, well, yeah. So what happens if good people, supposedly good people, are not doing philosophical midwifery and do not have the principles or institutions or patterns and habits in place to address their pathologos, and equally do not have the patterns, habits, institutions, practices in place to be learning the logos? What happens? Trump wins. A ridiculously, cartoonishly obvious representation of the pathologos will beat you, will take over your soul, will take over the country, will bring humanity to World War III, to its destruction, to inflict injustices all over the world. That's what we saw. You can't just not do anything and expect, I don't know, common sense to somehow defeat your pathologos, to somehow defeat fascism. So, silver lining, at least we have seen that. At least we have seen the need for actual progression, actual understanding of what would address the problems caused by capitalism, the problem of capitalism, and all of the things that follow. Wealth inequality, destruction of the planet, destruction of the environment, hoarding of wealth by terrible people who then get to use that wealth to, I don't know, do things like buy elections, start wars, attack their enemies, and so on and so on. You actually have to have things in place to address that. And Donald Trump showed us, hey, this is the sickness we have in our world. At least half of the people embrace their pathologos. Why didn't we do anything? This was the same problem that we read in chapter 1, where Pierre Grimes was walking along that Roman road to fight the fascist Nazis, same, and realizing, hang on a second, these are the exact same roads that the Romans walked on to fight off their barbarian attackers. We haven't learned anything. Why haven't we learned anything? This is one of the big questions we got in chapter 1 that we are carrying with us. Why is man so irrational and immature and can't learn anything? Why can't we learn? Well, Donald Trump was president of America. Now, we didn't learn anything. They didn't learn anything. We as a species didn't learn anything. We talk about America because they are a big political force, military force, economic force, but also they're on TV. So we get to see these cartoonish representations of the dynamics of humanity. And because we are actually in the logos on this channel, we can see how that reflects the pathologos. We can see, without having to play it out in our own lives or in our own reincarnations, we can see the implications of the pathologos and the logos, or the lack of the logos, on the global scale. And if we care enough about the human race and the planet, we might want to do something about problems like that. But also, we want to do something about it ourselves. We want to have that reflection and integrity to reflect on ourselves, using these people as a kind of mirror. The thing that that the progressives lacked, or the left lacked, the Democrats lacked. It didn't reflect. They didn't learn anything. They didn't change. And until we wake up to the logos and the pathologos, they're not going to. They are in a privileged, those people in charge are in a privileged class where they're sort of sheltered from much of the tyranny. They are very wealthy. They are the right colored skin. They are already entrenched in positions of power, so they're not going to feel the effects. And a lot of these people don't care until they feel the effects themselves. So likely they're not going to change, but we can change. We can change. We can set an example for change. We can use what we need for, we can use what we have discovered we needed for change in anything else that we do, in any jobs we have, in any relationships we have. And we can be better. We can be better and be a model for what is better. So, kind of a sad time. But we have to look at, okay, what is the logos telling us? If the mind constantly communicates for us and for our benefit, to us and for our benefit, what is the communication of this? It is very cartoonish. If you were to create a cartoon character of the most pathologos ridden person, or a person to represent the pathologos in human form, it would be Donald Trump. Everything about the man, old, decrepit, unhealthy, but also lying about his health, hiring people who just go along with his beliefs, like a mafia boss, like hiring a doctor that will lie about his health, all about appearance. He cakes on makeup poorly. It's not even a good appearance. Overtly racist, overtly sexist, wanting to murder anyone different from him. Grew up with a high-ranking KKK member authority person with his father, so hasn't addressed the cause of his pathologos from his own racist father, who was apparently a brutal and terrible person. Looks weird, looks like inhuman, looks fake. Everything he does is a lie, like constant pathological lie. So you couldn't even you couldn't invent, if you were writing a script for a personification of the pathologos, that would be thrown out. It's too ridiculous. It's too clownish. Literally, he's clown-like. He looks like he wears clown makeup. So maybe that's the silver lining. We get a easy-to-see, cartoon-like, clownish representation of what happens as a person. If we don't address our pathologos, we'll become like Trump. And if we are not doing what we can to establish and follow the principles of philosophical midwifery to remove our pathologos and have our principles established to discover what the logos is, discover what's true, then we will play out, our lives will play out in a similar way. Like the left, we will be taken over by tyranny, by fascism. The fascism and tyranny of the soul, the pathologos. So, yeah, something needed to be said about that. Yeah, it's a puzzle. How long has this book been out here for? I think it was first published in, where does it say? 60s? Maybe the 80s? 1998. So 25 years. It's been around for 25 years. Why aren't we reading it? It's a puzzle. I don't know. When I first discovered the book, I went around telling everybody, hey, you need to read this book. It's amazing. You ever wanted to understand your problems? You ever wanted to remove your problems? You ever had a feeling like all of these self-help gurus and you know, life coaches and stuff are all just talking nonsense and nothing actually works? Do you actually want to find something that works? I was very excited about it. And for like 10 years, no one else was. It's one of the puzzles that I have been puzzling about for a long time. Why not? If it's, by the way, this isn't a belief. This is the only form of psychotherapy that has been empirically proven to work. So if you value reason and evidence and science, then you should be in this book. If you value Socrates, you should be in this book. If you value reason, you should be in this book. If you value being free of problems, you should be in this book. Well, we're in this book, so we're doing better. So good for us. And yeah, it's a puzzle I have. I don't understand it. I don't understand why people don't embrace it. And even people who are familiar with this book, a lot of people get into it for a while. It's like a hobby. Give them 6 months and they're out of the door. They're out the door. Maybe a year or two and they're out the door. Why? Even people who met Pierre Grimes and have done midwifery with him and have experienced the benefits, they only go for a little while and then they're out. Why? Well, learn from it. If you're watching this, don't. Don't do that. Don't have this as a hobby. This is important and real and significant and will help you. It's literally the paradigm for what helps. Don't take it as a hobby. And don't use it selectively. So there are people who are familiar with it and see the value of it, but use it selectively. So they'll see the value of it, but when they are silencing the logos or they are acting tyrannically, they don't want to reflect. No. Pathologos is a sometimes food, sometimes game. No, it's not. So stay in the game, even when it's hard, even when things like this happens globally, even in your relationships. If you find that other people who love midwifery and the logos and understanding and have integrity, even when they leave, stay in the game. Go the whole way. Free yourself from your problems and give yourself the option, at least, to escape the prison of reincarnation too, and be a better person. But yeah, it is a puzzle. Even the people who have benefited seem to take the benefits. Oh, okay, I've benefited a lot. Okay, now I'm going back to my old way of life. Hey, maybe you've had a spiritual experience or had friends who have had a spiritual experience. It changes them for a week or two. Give them a month and they're back to their old way of life again. Maybe it's happened to you. Maybe you've had a spiritual experience and maybe that's one of the things that have awoken you to the logos. Stay in that, which means understand what brings us down, the path of logos, free ourselves from that anchor, and also understand the state that you were in so that you can get back to it and integrate it, stay in that state and go beyond it. That's the logos. And if you find a good person who has that integrity to follow the logos and apply the understanding of the pathologos when things get tough, when they are blocked, then value them, because it's so rare, so rare. Oh, hi there, Troy. Sorry to catch, what do you call it? I didn't mean for you to catch strays, as they say. Yeah, but so our chat, a friend in chat saying that had a spiritual experience and fell off. Universal, absolutely. So a good friend, as we read in this book of Pierre Grimes, was Alan Watts. Some people might be more familiar with him. One of his catchphrases is, I think it was Alan Watts, maybe it was Terence McKenna. Alan Watts' quote was, these experiences are a telephone call. Once you take the call, you can put the phone down. Now, that sounds nice, but lacks content. The idea is, if that happens, we need to do two things. Oh, you've been watching for a few weeks. Hi, thank you. I'm hope that you're enjoying it. And I hope you stay in the game too. Especially when things get tough. Because the fact that things get tough is evidence of a caring and beneficial universe giving us what we need to discover the clues about our pathologos, which we're here for. We have to master midwifery. And also in doing that, not only do we gain freedom from our blocks and a mastery of the dialectic, but everything we learn in philosophical midwifery, we can metaphorically reflect onto the positive, because the pathologos is a distorted reflection of the logos. So any insight we get in midwifery, we can generate a question about philosophy. For example, we have been reading about the significance of the appearance of greatness and beauty and care in our pathologos model. which means maybe our soul seeks the truth about beauty and greatness and care. Maybe these are all aspects of being that we pursue in philosophy. So if you are one of those people who have had an experience or a profound state of mind, or have been in a flow state for a while, and then upon reflection drop, you've realized you've fallen out of it, or maybe you've even forgotten you used to even think that way. That's common as well. Then that tells us two things. Number one, well, first of all, that's universal. That's always going to happen. Well, it will happen until you do two things. Number one, understand the cause of the fall. That's philosophical midwifery. That's mastering the art of the dialectic applied to what is false about self and reality. And number two, master the logos. That's why we read the Balboa translation of Socrates. It gives us what we need to practice the dialectic, which is the understanding of what's true. So if you have a brief glimpse at this is the example I like to use because I'm from Australia and rugby is a thing here. It's a violent, brutal sport. But if you have an understanding of the language of a scrum, of a tackle, of an onside kick and all those sorts of things, then if you have an experience of a rugby game, you'll be able to make sense of it. You won't be afraid of it. And you'll be able to take your experience to learn. For example, if I see the Wallabies play the All Blacks, and I see a fantastic 5/8 do a fantastic play, I understand what he did there. I can understand what's going on because I have the language, and I can use that myself to improve my rugby game. So if we if we are carrying with us the logos, the understanding and the dialectic, the understanding, dianoia, into our experience, we'll be able to better understand it, better make sense of it, and better integrate it when we come back into our bodies. Or if we are in some sort of state where we are both, like some sort of flow state where we can stay in a heightened state of consciousness, you won't, you'll be able to understand where you're at, and maybe even use your understanding to go into that deeper and deeper and deeper. Maybe even wonder about the cause of that experience. So that's the significance of the logos. That's why we read the Balboa translation of Socrates, because that gives us what we need to learn the logos. And that's why we're in this book here, to discover the nature of our pathologos that pulls us out. Okay? And whether it's our own spiritual experiences, whether it's relationships that might have started well and we've fallen off with our relationships, or whether it's politically, as we saw today with what happened to our inability to stop fascism in America. Even though we knew there was going to be a fall, even though we knew everything about the guy and what would happen, even though he was literally telling us I'm going to be a problem, we weren't able to do anything about it because we lacked the logos, we lacked the understanding. It was all hope and vibes and feelings and nothingness. There was no logos, no understanding of what is actually good to create good policy and laws, no understanding of the logos, and also no understanding of how to address the causes of fascism, of tyranny, of the pathologos. So that's where we are in our reading. So, last time we looked at how there are limits set. We have a survival. So, again, a lot of these people who, to use as an example, vote for these fascist parties or for within our soul, when we sacrifice our higher states of being, we get a feeling of safety. Survival as a member of the family clan is assured. We get a role, we get an identity, we get a way of showing ourselves, we get a mask we can wear, becomes very comfortable and easy. This is all we get. This is what we get for sacrificing truth, integrity, our goals, our understanding, everything good. Also, last time we talked about relationships. So these are levels to this. This is within us, within our soul. This is within our scope of our relationships, within a greater scope of our groups, families, workplace, occupations, and then socially, politically. As above, so below. It plays out on every level. So, because our Pathologos model was a model of caring and love, because it seemed like we were being treated in their highest regard in a rare moment where they were sharing their truest vision, this becomes our model of those things. And everything gets reinterpreted according to that model, so we stay trapped. Blinders on. This would be the bottom of the cave in Plato's cave analogy in the Republic. And if we don't recognize these dramas and our role in these dramas, we will play out the tragic implications. Ending relationships, falling out of your high states of mind, allowing Trump to take over the greatest military on earth, the tragic implications of not recognizing the drama and your role in it. And what binds us to it? An intense loyalty. Again, easy to see with Trump. Doesn't matter what he said, they'd be loyal to him anyway. And many comedians made jokes to show the hypocrisy. Hey, Joe Biden was on the plane with Jeffrey Epstein many times. Doesn't it show you that he's bad? Oh yes, says a Trump supporter. Terrible person, should be in jail. I got my names mixed up. I meant Donald Trump. Oh no, that doesn't apply to him. Fiercely loyal. At the expense of logos, at the expense of reason, at the expense of principles, at the expense of integrity. Sacrifice the logos, self logos. It's the self logos. The logos that unfolds the dimensions of reality, cognitive functions, the structure of the universe, the principles that nature follows, the principles that our soul follows. All of these principles are the logos. All of this logos is from self, metaphysically. The first cause is self. So everything that we experience is a reflection and unfolding of self. It's you. The real you, not this you. This is the you we need to get rid of. It's not true. And in order to maintain its existence, it has to block the truth. So everything we're reading in this book and everything we're reading about reality in Plato is you. You're learning about yourself, the real self, the self that you will be open to once we get rid of this false self, which is fascinating. So we can call it the self-logos. What blocks us from ourselves following the self, our self-logos to the self, in a way where we can have a mastery of that logos and function with it for all times, in our relationships with ourselves, especially when we're seeking meaningful goals, especially when we're in the presence of beauty. Either everyday beautiful things and meaningful goals, or the most meaningful goals, spiritual states, which is beauty itself, so the highest peak of beauty. Can we function with a mastery of the self-logos to navigate it well and use it beneficially? And in our relationships, the people that are most meaningful to us, people who we consider most beautiful, and in the world, to create a meaningful and beautiful planet, world, species. All of that is just the use of our mastery of the self-logos, which is literally what Socrates in the Phaedo says we're here for. To learn it and to do it. Education and nurture. That's why I've been talking a lot about today doing it, practicing it. Especially when times are tough. That's when you need to actually employ the virtues, which are all just various ways of following the logos when times are tough. Temperance, when you're losing your cool. Courage, when it feels like something else is true, when it feels like the pathologos is true. Follow the logos anyway. That's courage. It takes courage to do that. Not just when you're scared, but especially when there are pleasures of the pathologos or pleasures of any kind to distract you. In fact, Socrates says it's the pleasures that are more dangerous than the pains. Pleasure, pain, fear, and desire. It's our desire and our pleasures that can draw us away from following the logos more than even our fear and our pain. Wisdom, following the logos, literally. Justice, doing it at all times. Holiness, loving that and desiring to do that because that's what the divine would do. That's what being does. So you're not holy because this is the euphophro. What is the virtue of holiness? Do you do what the gods like it because the gods like it or because it's good to do? Do the gods like it because it's innately good? In other words, are you following authority and beliefs, or are you in the exact same state of mind of the gods who seek to follow the logos because they see its significance? It's all following the logos. So, what keeps us tied to what blocks us from our own self-logos? An intense loyalty to preserve these associations, these images, these roles, these images of beauty and greatness, and these figures that represent them. They reawaken symbolically early conflicts, keeping alive what is believed to be shared moments of genuine intimacy. So we keep playing them out because we think that this is the highest. So this is our false analogy we've been talking about. If analogy is how we work through analogy. We think when we learn something, it's through analogy. I want to learn how to... I remember when I learned how to shave. It was like when I was little. I was like, oh, is it like just like mowing the lawn? Like you just take off the pieces like you take off the grass when you mow the lawn? Yeah, oh, that makes sense. I used something I did know, mowing the lawn, to learn something I didn't. This is like that. Now the problem is we are carrying a false analogy. The higher thing, so to use our analogy, you want to be a good king? Well, let me talk about how a good shepherd would care for his sheep as an analogy so you can understand how to be a good king. Well, we think this is the ultimate. This is genuine intimacy. So everything else is like this ideal. Let me put it on the board. Analogy is for learning. So we take what we know. Shepherd, how he relates to his sheep. To understand what we don't know. So we pull out aspects that are like how a king relates to his subjects. This is likeness. Because it's not the same. There is going to be samenesses and differences. So there's going to be sameness and differences. Because you don't eat your subjects like you might eat a sheep. You don't actually feed them grass, but you do care for them. and so on and so on. That's called likeness. This is the principle of likeness. That's fundamental to learning. But also it's development. We want to become like, the ideal. So this is what we've been talking about today, about how we can see side A, what is, and side B, what isn't, is not. That's the dialectic. The dialectic has two categories, what is and what is not. So in the side of what is not, we have a false analogy. Use a different color. That causes our problems. We think that this early seeing is the great. So in other words, we can use, over here we can say this is, let's get some more space on the board. Another way of a way of categorizing the parts of the analogy is one side is the lesser and one side is the greater. Now I'm using these words on purpose because lesser, greater, same, difference, likeness, these are all fundamental terms of the logos, fundamental terms of thought, and we can use them to understand fundamentally the dimensions of reality and the different cognitive functions. The ladder that we walk, they can be understood, all of them can be understood as different uses of these fundamental terms. Everything that you see in life is going to be the same as something and have some sort of difference. This remote is the same as this pen because they're both black. They're both things, but they're also different. Everything is like that. It's fundamental. Now, one of the things we have been talking about today is how come this book has been out for 25 years and solves human problems, all sorts, spiritual problems, global problems, personal problems, relationship problems. How come no one's read it? Well, another question along with that is, that's like, how come no one's read this? How do you master the dialectic of what's not? Also, you could say, how come nobody's mastered the dialectic of what is? The other part of the game. So this book here is the Philosophical Midwifery Orange book. Orange Sutra, they call it. Spiritual text, Sutra, S-U-T-R-A. This dialectic on what is the Parmenides. Specifically, you have to read the Balboa translation. If you're not reading that, you are going to tie yourself in knots because of how badly it's been translated. Balboa. I mean, it has been able to be read before, but it requires a bit of extra work. Helps if you have friends who are masters of Greek, so you can read the Greek at the same time. So, this is interesting because... Let's make this orange. So, hey, how come Trump told us what he was, but we didn't learn? How come we're still fighting Nazis and fascists as we did doing today, as we did in the 1940s, as we did in ancient Roman times? How come no one's reading this book? Now we can say the same thing. the use of these words, lesser, greater, same, difference, likeness, and all of the other self-logos terms. So this self-logos that we've been talking about has terms, has a language, like we talked about with rugby, has a language, has terms, scrum, tackle, try. The self-logos has terms as well. That's what we're learning. Greatness, holiness, courage, temperance, lesser, greater, same, different, likeness, whole, part, one, many. These are all fundamental self-logos terms that you can use to understand every system of thinking. Of what is nihilism, relativism, materialism, atheism, Marxism, Trumpism, Buddhism, Taoism, all of them can be understood within a paradigm using these terms. So before all of the historical tragic implications of Christianity, the Dark Ages, the Crusades, the Third Reich, then fascist, then the religious fundamentalism of that Trump manipulates, the grift economy, prosperity gospel, they call it. All of that was predicted, anticipated, understood hundreds of years before it was even invented, before it even came to light in the Parmenides. Hundreds of years before it played out. So we could have understood it the same way if we read this book over here, we could have understood the problems of Trump without it actually having to be played out within on the global stage. Same thing with Christianity. How the Christians killed the philosophers, burnt the libraries, executed people who were reading philosophy books, even executed people who were reading the Bible because it was a domination authority. It is a domination authority tradition, not one based on understanding but belief. And I can say that because I grew up Christian. So don't get butt hurt if you happen to be Christian. It applies to all religions, by the way, fundamentally. Not just all religions, all systems of thought can be represented as a certain level within a hierarchy. Now, fools will say, oh no, our way is the only way. Everything above that and below that is just the devil. That's nonsense. That's immaturity. Or maybe you're not going to say it's the devil because you're not that kind of Christian. They're just all wrong. They haven't accepted Jesus. Everyone above me and everyone below me. That's immature. You can't say that if you have an art. You can recognize Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, all of the isms. So that's why the Parmenides is called the greatest book never read. It's widely acknowledged that the Republic is one of the top 10 greatest books of Western literature. No one reads it. And if they read it, they're reading poor translations. No one reads it properly, the way that we read text in this channel. Learning to read. We're learning to read. We don't have it figured out, but we're figuring it out as we go, and we have a much different understanding of what it means to read. But hey, the Republic leads into the Parmenides. No one talks about the Parmenides as one of the greatest works of Western literature. The greatest book never read, and this book hopefully will be read by everybody soon. The one that we're reading on this channel. So, the fundamental false, going back to the analogies, the early scene is the greater. And everything else in life is the lesser. So everything else we live in life is a lesser analogy to the early scene. That's what is meant by what we read. Everything that we experience will be translated and interpreted and experienced through the pathologos false belief paradigm. We are carrying a false analogy. But as we talk about, we mentioned today, everything that we do in philosophical midwifery, because the pathologos is the distorted reflection of the logos, we can create a question about how can we understand what is? In other words, what is true greatness? What is true greatness? Care, truth, knowingness, love. And that is a true ideal and paradigm that becomes the greater to our life. In other words, we're carrying a false analogy with us that causes our problems. That's the pathologos. But if we're free from it, we still recognize, well, there's something in our soul that is used as analogy. We use it for thinking. We use it for learning. But also we learn it for development. So what is the true ideal of these, which are all themselves self-logos terms? All of these along with sameness, difference, likeness, lesser and greater, greatness, care, truth, knowingness, love. These are all self-logos terms. The language that we have to be using and thinking with at all times. That our soul also wants to take and hold on to and remember and use as the ideal in everything we do in life. So today we've been talking about people who've had a spiritual experience. We can say, this is the experience of being, the spiritual experience. We can call that nous. That's knowingness of being. That's nous in the Greek. We have to use the Greek because we don't have an English terms. Where does one get one of these books? This book, it used to be like $500 for a copy like a year ago, but they've done a new order and I think you can get them on Amazon or you could go to there's actually a publishing company, Hyperion. I'll look it up. All right, I can see they're $70. Oof, more expensive than I thought. Philosophical Midwifery, a new paradigm for understanding human problems with its validation. On Amazon, it's $70 Australian. It's $50 on Booktopia Australian, so you can find it online. Oh, Amazon for $40. Good for you. Hooray. Confetti. No, just balloons. Balloons are nice. And the Parmenides book you can get for free. Under our videos you can find if you Google Actually, I'll do it now. Balboa, Parmenides. You'll see a link to the Internet Archive. If you Google Balboa, Parmenides, you'll find a link to the Internet Archive where you can download the PDF for free. Chuck it into your little e-reader. Go down to the park and get puzzled by Parmenides. Parmenides is also Socrates' first experience into philosophy. He's a 19-year-old. Him and his buddies go to meet Parmenides, and Parmenides does all the things that we're learning about, recognizes his problem, talks to him about it, introduces the dialectic. So you need to learn the dialectic, otherwise you won't reach truth. That's just the game. And then he gives a demonstration of the dialectic in the highest possible way, giving us an understanding of all ontological levels and cognitive levels, so all levels of being, all levels of thinking, all levels of understanding that humans can go through, along with where their problems are. So if we read it, we'd like, oh, Christianity's being invented. Oh, that's this level. Here are the states of mind it can have. Here is the way of viewing self and reality. Here are its problems. Here is where you need to go from it so you can address those problems. And here is how it sits within a whole. Imagine that. Imagine somebody coming to you and say, oh yeah, I can give you a full rundown of your way of being and thinking. And I can show you how it's just a part within a whole. That might help you. That might free you from thinking this is all there is and this is only this and there's nothing else other than this. By someone saying, oh yeah, that's an interesting part that you have. Here's the rest of the thing. And this is where you sit. That might wake you up. So that's the Parmenides. So just as we carry a false analogy to cause our problems, that's the pathologos. We saw everything is going to be interpreted through this paradigm. Another way of saying that is we're carrying a false analogy that this early scene is the greater. This is what intimacy is. This is what beauty is. This is what it means to be knowing. This is what I'm seeking an opportunity to play out in my life, to be just like that. Everything else is just a shadow of that. Everything else I'm going to interpret in terms of that. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, becomes the blinders. Well, what's the truth? If our soul has this functionality that has been usurped by a false analogy, what's the true analogy that we are supposed to be having in our soul? Well, the greater would be the true experience of these terms that are imitated in the pathologos. The experience of that is nous, or sometimes called a spiritual experience, because it's you don't view it through your physical senses, because it's eternity, it's being, the experience of being. Ousia is the sense, the functionality of our mind that can turn around and experience mind itself. You could call it the sixth sense, or the eye of the soul. That's the greater that we use in our life. And what are we supposed to be doing in our life? What are we doing in our life, whether we like it or not? The dialectic. Your life, as we are reading in this text, is a walking dialectic of this. So a false analogy, causing a negative dialectic, negative and harmful dialectic, which is your life. Resulting in between the greater and the less, resulting in mask, persona, way of being, all of these things that those Trump supporters want and like. They like that they have a mask they can wear. They like that they have a way of being. They like that they have a role and way of expressing themselves. Role. It gives them a manner through which they can express themselves that might otherwise be lacking in their lives because they're not in philosophy. They don't have a community like this one. Resulting in eventually a identification. Self. You think this is yourself. That's the great tragic end of a life lived in this way. You spend your life in a dialectic with what's false. Identity. And you think, oh, that's me. If we are here to learn about the self, that's what we do if we're not doing it. Unification. This is why we're in the game anyway. We're always doing a dialectic. That's why you can't just do what Kamala Harris did and do nothing. You can't campaign on, at least I'm not that guy. Because that's not the thing. You can't just not do dialectic. You are always doing a dialectic. Trump offered this dialectic. The one that we have an urge towards as a species that is early in its evolution. Allowed for our survival within caveman times. The cause of our problems. Kamala did not offer this dialectic. So she was really doing this dialectic, but not as flamboyantly and not to the extent, of course. But that's why you can't just say, oh, I'm just not going to be a bad person. No. You will be. You have to be doing midwifery to drop this false analogy. You have to discover it first. And then you're still doing a dialectic. So this goes back to this spiritual experience. If you do have a spiritual experience, then what do you end up doing? That experience becomes the greater. That you keep in mind, you keep in memory as you live for the next couple of weeks. Problems over here become less significant because you're keeping this in mind. Keeping this in memory. Or maybe even keeping a fragment of it in your consciousness or to whatever level you are able to. So it diminishes the effect of this, but also gives you a kind of goal or a kind of greater to focus on. I want to get back into this state. This was my model of beauty. I want to be more like this in the world. I want to help my friends get into this experience. I want to get into this experience. This was real truth. So this is going to be my marker and paradigm for truth when I do things. So that's the greater. What's life? Dialectic. Dialectic. So this becomes the model or the ideal or the paradigm that you use and you reference with the dialectic, which you can either learn to do consciously, which is what we're doing in this channel by reading Midwifery and Plato, or you're going to let the pathologos, you're going to let your inherited sickness through generations take over and you're going to be a slave to that. You're going to let your pathologos, you're going to let Trump be a master of your soul. Or you be a master. You be a master. Who else are you going to let be a master of your soul? Someone else? Someone else who doesn't know about this? Who's better qualified than you? Who is familiar with this and this? Self-mastery. That's the option. You're either going to be a master a master or slave. That's it. You're always doing a dialectic. You're going to be a slave to this, or you're going to be a master of the dialectic by mastering the dialectic and mastering nous and ousia. In other words, use your freedom from this by midwifery to master the dialectic, which is literally what Socrates says is the exercise of philosophy, which is literally what Parmenides said to Socrates when Socrates was young. You have to do to reach truth. So the dialectic is also the method through which you reach truth. You reach nous and ousia. You have that spiritual experience. That's why, as we're reading in the Meno, Socrates says education is a training for the initiation into truth, being. So you have to not only master the dialectic to get there and to make sense of it while you're there and to use it to others afterwards, and yourself afterwards, to stay in that, integrate it, but you have to master having being. How do you know how to tap into ousia, open the third eye or whatever? How do you get into nous, experience being as much as you can? That's mastership. That's why we read. Self-mastership. Of the self-logos. Because logos is that, the dialectic is the structure of the logos, and logos is one of the aspects of being. And logos has the possibility of touching even higher. That's the first hypothesis of Parmenides. What is beyond even the spiritual experience? How do you understand that? That's the first hypothesis of Parmenides. So, by understanding what we are reading, the pathologos origin scene becomes a model through which we experience everything, including love, including care. Therefore, our relationships are a slave to this sickness. You will end up trying to force or insist on or demand that your partner and your relationships play out in this way. Because you're not in control, it is. You are a slave so long as you have a pathologos. You're not free. Or you add a third person into your relationship, the self-logos, and both people are focused on mastering this, which is the true model of love, the true model of care, the true model of greatness, knowingness, and truth. And if you find people like that, invite them to join the Discord, because this is a lifelong relationship. You don't give up. That's what we're talking about today. Don't just give up. Don't have a little bit of freedom or a little bit of experience of nous and then say, that's enough for me. I'm going back to my 9 to 5. Because what you're going back to is this. You can't be Kamala Harris saying, well, at least I'm not Trump. No, you are creating the conditions for Trump to take over. And as I say, it's rare. It requires courage, the virtues, which is to practice the things when you need to have them. And if you find someone like that in your life, do your best to do this with them, because that's rare. And join the Discord. So we're learning about midwifery over here, and we're learning about philosophy over here. And so we're talking about analogy. So this is analogy is the for our development and for our thinking, but also analogy is also for generating questions. So to carry a question is to be on a quest. insights. So we looked at analogies here for how we think and learn. We talked about it here for our development, because we are either in a dialectic relationship as a slave to the pathologos, or we're developing self-mastery. And that relationship is based on a analogy. The greater of the earlier scene is like everything else in life, or this true ideal in nous is like what we use as reference to in our masterful use of the dialectic. And we got all this, which sheds light in and helps us understand what true philosophy is, what we've been doing when we've been reading Balboa Plato. All this came from what we're doing in midwifery. Isn't that neat? By looking at one as an analogy to another. So you can say, this is the greater, and this side is the lesser. So everything that we do in midwifery, we can see, is the lesser reflection of the greater in philosophy. So we're really being super productive by reading both. So everything we read in the Meno, or in any whatever we're reading Meno at the moment, we can say, oh, how does that help us understand what we're doing in midwifery? Equally so, everything we learn in midwifery, how does that help us understand what we're doing in philosophy over here? So analogy is for thinking. It's how we think. Analogy is for how we develop. Analogy is for the dialectic. Analogy is for generating questions and insights. And also we talked about Parmenides, which shows that the unfolding of reality from the oneself. So it's also for generation. So analogy is the principle for generation. Or what's the fundamental principle of analogy? Likeness. So the Parmenides shows us the unfolding of, by the way, it unfolds according to the dialectic. So using the dialectic to explain the unfolding levels of reality, that will give us a way of understanding all possible systems of thinking, types of groups, levels of enlightenment. That's the Parmenides, and all of that follows analogy. So all of this is analogy. So let's make analogy bigger. Analogy. The Y's on the L. If that's the case, we can actually go back into here and say, okay, so if this is a complete spiritual tradition, we could therefore say so here's a nice conclusion. Therefore, a complete spiritual tradition or what we call a paradigm, the paradigm for spirituality, the model, the blueprints would be philosophy, or the logos, midwifery, philosophical midwifery, Pathologos. And analogy. The use of analogy to talk about it, to teach it, to follow it, to generate new questions, to generate new insights, to function with both of them artfully, and the use of analogy to represent the principles of both, because both are dialectic. That's called mythology. Mythology. Mythology is nothing other than a analogical representation of the dynamics of the greater and the lesser. Which is pretty neat. Because it gives us a triad, and triads are fun. So one time that, so in the Phaedo, we have these self-logos terms mentioned. In the Phaedo, Socrates says, hey, you know how we have the self-logos terms that are ways of understanding being, greatness, goodness, beauty itself, justice itself. But also, don't forget the other things. Like, you know how there's sameness and difference, like and unlike, whole and part. They're also a class of self-logos terms. They're the ones that we are familiar with from the Parmenides. They're the ones that we use to understand all of the levels of reality and ways of thinking and stuff. He also said, by the way, there's a third level, greater, lesser, and whole. Now, this is a tricky one because it's a different kind of whole than the whole that's used as part and whole, because that's in that Parmenides category. Part and whole, same and different, whatever. One and many. So it's a kind of whole. Let's say wholeness. Oh, I don't want to say wholeness because wholeness makes it sound like that other category of beauty and justice and goodness, beautiness, justiceness. It's a different kind of whole. I sometimes use the word ultimate, which you guys might be familiar with, you guys and gals, because we talk about the levels of reality, the unfolding levels of self from the one self being, that's that experience of eternity. That's metaphysics. That's what we focus on with the dialectic in the logos and becoming. So that's interesting because philosophy is about this. Philosophy is only about this. It's the logos applied to being. Midwifery is the logos applied to becoming. What we are learning in midwifery is by being born into this physical world of becoming, we get these images and we get beliefs. Beliefs, images, opinions, that's all the physical world of becoming. That's the lesser. But even philosophy is a stepping stone to the one self. So we can ask a question, is that the ultimate? Question we can carry. And by the way, if you had a mastery of the level of becoming, beliefs and opinions, what this last election was voted on, hey, do you like Trump's pathologos beliefs and opinions? Or do you like Kamala's pathologos light beliefs and opinions? No one talking about the truth in being. The absolutely true, always true paradigms. Doesn't matter what country you're from, what color your skin is, whether you're a man or a woman. These are always true and for everyone and for always. That's why they're understandable in dianoia and knowable in nous. That's why it can be the greater part of the analogy for the dialectic for all people, even Socrates 2,500 years ago, even aliens a million years in the future. If you have a mastership of that, because you're not a slave and you're on this track, and you have a mastership of that, and you can operate from this level of both, can you artfully function to help and teach, to teach and learn, to help people's development, to see the unfolding of all reality, to generate questions and insights in both levels. Because to be a human being, a rational human being, is to be operating on both levels. So there's this. Is oneself true self-mastery. Because if you are really benefiting people, you are helping them learn what is true for their soul, for reality, for always, not just in this life. You're not helping them get Bugattis or helping them win elections. You're helping them understand the truth, which they can use as their analogy in their life. But if that's what really benefits all people, what about women? Yes, women too. But what about brown people? Yes, brown people too. What about children? Oh yeah, children too. What about the old people? Oh, definitely old people. Everyone. That's what we were learning in the Meno. Meno had all those different racist, sexist, pathologos hierarchy beliefs. Men are better than women, who are better than children, who are better than slaves, who are better than old people. I don't know if old people are right at the bottom. Maybe slaves would be right at the bottom, but this is very common. This is the hierarchy that is sold by Donald Trump to rich white men so they can feel like they're greater than others, so they can feel justified in playing out their ignorance and their pathologos. So what? So that means if you are really benefiting people, you are using a mastership of being to help people reach truth, but also all human beings in that process will be dealing with false beliefs from their pathologos that, as we are reading, is generated from the world of becoming. So you have to help people. How do you help people? You have to use analogy, because analogy is how we think. It's how we learn. It's how we develop. There's a false analogy here, there's a true analogy here, and there would be a mastership of analogy here. If that's the case, are we fair in saying that, these are questions by the way, is the greater being, the logos in philosophy, is the lesser from the world of becoming, and is the whole, so this is called ontology, or metaphysics, the levels of reality. So we can generate a question. This third thing that would make a complete spiritual and intellectual and self-development and psychology tradition, is it fair to call this the ultimate? Because it seems like mythology would be the least, because this is an accurate understanding of the dialectic applied to our false beliefs from the world of becoming. This is an accurate, true, verifiable use of the dialectic and mastery of the world of being. But this is a make-believe. This is mythology. Zeus wasn't actually a dude. Achilles maybe didn't even really exist. The Minotaur probably never was real. Isn't this the lowest because it's make-believe? Unless we reflect on the significance of analogy the way we've done today. And we also recall our principle that you can only solve problems from one cognitive or ontological level above the one you're operating on. In other words, Kamala couldn't solve the Trump problems of beliefs by throwing around more beliefs, which happen to be full of problems anyway. You can't solve problems of beliefs with beliefs. You have to develop an understanding. So no one's going to defeat fascism or Trump unless they say, hey, by the way, I'm a party not of beliefs, but of truth. Actual truth. Always truth. Verifiable truth. Understandable truth. Provable truth. That's the world of being. That also that has to be able to understand the cause of Trump, the conditions for Trump, and how to remedy Trump, as well as how do we get our excellence? How do we live in a greater way? Otherwise, fascism will take over. You can't just not do dialectic. You either do it on being, that's philosophy, or you are a slave to your pathologos. Your dialectic is based on the realm of becoming, the physical world, physical imitations of truth. But if every human being is playing this game, would a true master have to exist at a higher level, which has a scope over the two, and can use analogy to help learn, help development, help thinking, help generate questions and insights? And if that's the case, then could we make a case that if a complete tradition has the greater, lesser, and ultimate of logos, pathologos, and mythology, can we make the case that mythology or analogy is actually the ultimate? And if so, is that whole ultimate represented as this ontological level? So we have the lesser world of becoming, which is a reflection of the greater world of being, which is also a reflection from an unfolding of the one self. All of this through analogy. So is mythology the greater? So is our triad like this with mythology or analogy on top? And not what seems more true, logos or philosophy, and then the second one would be pathologos or philosophical midwifery, and the bottom mythology, because it's an analogical representation of the principles that apply to both. But hang on a second, if it's the principles that apply to both, then those principles would have to be more primary. If beauty applies to both beautiful puppies and beautiful people, then beauty has to be more primary than the physical representations. So if the principles of the dialectic and logos applies to both philosophy and midwifery, it would be of a higher status, which helps us justify our claim that the ultimate would be analogy or mythology. So what's the true spiritual tradition? Philosophy, midwifery, and analogy. Logos, pathologos, and mythological. Oh, logo. Important to realize. So we know where. So this is a reorientation, a review and reorientation today of philosophical midwifery, showing us where we're at, showing us how we're learning both at the same time, and showing us our goal. So this is the stakes. We just read last time that the stakes are, if we don't remove our pathologos, if we don't address our if we don't address our slave-like relationship in a sick dialectic based on a sick analogy, we won't be able to regain our open-mindedness, our self-state of mind, our self-curiosity, our self-understanding based on our self-experience, and we won't be able to reach our most meaningful and beautiful goals, our self-goals. That's the stakes. The stakes of staying in this game and not giving up after a year or 6 months, or because you've had some success. Stay in it. Until when? Until always, probably even after this life. It's a relationship. It's a way of relating. Addressing this, freeing us from this prison, from these chains. But also the stakes of staying in the other half of this channel. The stakes of developing a mastership of the dialectic so that you don't fall back into being a slave, being in your problems and suffering the implications in your life, the destruction of your relationships, the not being able to get what's beautiful and meaningful in this life and the next. So if we do stay in the game, if we do our best to stay in the game and we find friends,
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
To share in this adventure, what are the, so we talked about the stakes of what we lose, but what's the stakes of what we gain? This. It's what we did today. True self-mastery. Being able to operate in the physical world of becoming, in the metaphysical world of pure being, and the higher or ultimate level of the oneself. As we read in the Phaedo, we need to purify ourselves from that. We have to perfect ourselves from that. But even philosophy, which is here, is not the end. It's a goal to get into philophrenesis. So if we give up, if we let ourselves be a slave to what's false, even if it feels comfortable and true, or it feels like intimacy, it feels like love, it's comfortable, there's a role, there's a way of being, there's a way of expressing your anger, so long as it's directed towards the right people, or whatever, people outside your little group. If we allow ourselves to become slave to that injustice, not only do we have those other stakes we mentioned, but if we stay in the game, we get this. This is the stakes. This is what we can get. True self-mastery of the oneself, being able to operate in both levels in a fun way. This is fun. Once you've seen it, it's fun to make stories about it. This is talking, by the way. You talk with analogies. Even if it's gossip. You meet up for coffee with your friend. We're still doing analogy. Oh, you've seen Jessica? Oh, she's such a cow. That still, even if it's the lowest form of conversation, it's still an analogy. Jessica is like a cow. There are some samenesses and differences between Jessica and a cow. She's not literally a cow. There are some differences. She doesn't eat grass, but she's like a cow because she's big, fat, and smelly, or whatever that insult is about. And people like to gossip, so long as it's something they know about. If you are an anime fan, you can talk about how Deku from My Hero Academia is like I don't know, Naruto from Naruto. Or who's that guy? Okay, you name it. People who are into anime like to make analogies because they see it, they have an understanding, they're curious, they're interested, and they know about it. Talking is analogy, learning is analogy, teaching is analogy, living is an analogy because dialectic is analogy. And our life is a walking dialectic. Now, the difference is, imagine meeting up for coffee and being able to have fun talking about the connections you are seeing between philosophy and the Path of Logos. or between your learning of the soul and what you saw in the political elections, or what you are discovering in the realm of being and what's playing out in your personal relationships, or what you see for the destiny of your soul and what you see for the destiny of our human species. It's fun to make those connections, to talk about it. And by the way, you might have a hobby or an occupation where you get to write scripts or make video games or write songs. Wouldn't it be fun to use analogy in this way? Would that be a kind of fun practice and expression of a kind of mastery of the logos? Isn't that what we do anyway? The difference is whether you are making analogies between Sarah and a cow because you're at the level of gossip and personal beliefs, or you are talking about the logos, the pathologos. Or making an analogy between Trump, how is Trump like Meno? Or how can we be like Socrates? Different level of the same thing. You're still doing a dialect. You're still doing analogies. You're still living an analogy as a dialectic. You're still using it in your conversation. You're still using it in your thinking. The difference is, if we stay in this game, we can develop a true self-mastership of this and use it beneficially, which is neat.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So, back into the text. This is a reflection of and the pushing of the implications of, that's part of analogy. If Sarah is like a cow, okay, let's not use that one. If a shepherd is like a king, what else follows? We've seen about how a shepherd looks after his sheep, how a king looks after his subjects, but push the implications. What are the other consequences? Here's another term. Shepherd is like sheep. He has a guard dog. Pushing the implications after you see a connection. What would be the equivalent of a guard dog for a king? The royal guard? The shepherd lives in a tent. King lives in a castle. But also, what are the other implications? What follows? What are the consequences? Well, if a shepherd is a bad shepherd, what happens? His sheep die. If a king is a bad king, what happens? Push the implications. That's how you learn and gain benefit from these analogies. So what we are doing is, that reflection is a pushing of the implications, which is part of analogy, which is part of learning, which is part of self-mastership of what we read here. That these are believed to be shared moments of intimacy because of that false analogy. When someone comes along to play a role similar as our origin scene, it becomes a sign of loving and knowing, and unknowingly we play out the rest of the pathologos drama. That's the pushing of the implication. What we just said about pushing the implications for learning, we do that anyway. If someone comes along to represent that greater analogy, that person seems to be loving and caring because he's really yelling at me like mom and dad did, then we push the implications anyway. We play out the rest of the drama. We add in our life the guard dog. We add the tent. And we also reach the tragic conclusion of the sheep dying and the subjects dying. Isn't that interesting? So by looking for analogies, by looking for the dialectic structure, and by pushing the implications, and by pushing the implications to a conclusion, we are consciously doing what we do anyway. We are becoming a master of our own existence, of our own self, and not a slave. So another analogy here, we play out the implications to the tragic implications, and we play out the rest of the drama. Unknowingly, unknowingly, as a slave. not as a master. Hence, it is inevitable that when we pursue our object of love and strive to realize a meaningful relationship, there's our beauty or love, both, and meaning, beauty and meaning, love and meaning, we will find our pathologos manifest itself. Inevitable, because we're human beings. We get given both, the greater and the lesser, and therefore the opportunity to develop mastership of analogy referring to both. Inevitable. That's why we stay in the game. We have lots to learn. We have lots that we can keep seeing more and more and more. It's a way of being. Just like Trump sold a way of being to American racists and based on their pathologos, we are learning a way of being here. So you unknowingly play it out. It's inevitable that when we pursue meaning and love and beauty, we will find our pathologos sticking up its smelly head. A cow, just like Jessica, Sarah, whoever it was before. The price we pay for our loyalty to the pathologos increases dramatically as the goal becomes more personally significant. What could be more personally significant than self-mastership? So, be aware. Anticipate it. And just as we said, a good presidential campaign or a good society would anticipate these principles, anticipate that human beings will look for situations to play out their pathologos, that Trumps will arise, that Nazis will arise, and set the conditions in place that to address it, learn from it, and improve from it before it even happens. A good society will have read Parmenides and the Orange Sutra. So too for us. If you pursue what's personally significant, especially beauty and meaning, the more personally significant those things are, anticipate your pathologos will come up. So put in place principles, habits, disciplines to reflect on it with the logos and dialectic, to use midwifery and also philosophy when it comes up. Well, especially midwifery when your blocks come up. So set some principles, have some friends around who also value this. So as a good society, so too a good soul. As above, so below, which is another example of analogy. So the laws in place to anticipate what happens with the logos and pathologos is the world of becoming, society, just as in the greater, so that's the lesser, the greater for your soul. Have in your life the anticipation of this for how to address it with your soul. Especially if you are reading along with the Mino, be aware. Counterattack we read earlier. Within a relatively short time, love is eclipsed. This is what happens in your relationship if you're not setting these principles, having that third person as a member of your relationship. Self-mastery of the logos. True love will be eclipsed, and by strange alchemy it will be transformed into a model of our respective pathologos. It becomes the lesser to the greater. Not the true greater. Our relationship doesn't become a lesser to true being and self in a way that we can be drawn up to it through learning and development through analogy. It becomes dragged down to the even lesser. Our false analogy of the greater drags us down. Strange. So we, in our reflection, we made sense of the puzzle the author was giving us. He used the word strange alchemy. That's an analogy, so that is a clue. It's a metaphor, it's an analogy. It's not actually, it's like a strange alchemy. So he didn't give us the literal, which sometimes, often, is a clue for us readers, if you're reading well, to do the work, do the reflection, as we did today, to solve the puzzle. What is the way? It's not actually by strange alchemy. We discovered it. What was the answer? Analogy. By the way, strange alchemy is itself an analogy. So there's a bit of a clue there. There's a puzzle hidden in that. So by this strange alchemy, what we discovered was analogy, and the third part of the true spiritual tradition, logos, pathologos, and mythology, philosophy, midwifery, and analogy. By analogy, it becomes transformed into a model of our respective pathologos. Now we understood why. And for when each imposes on the other their greater, analogy, those demands and expectations that are rooted in a pathologos, model of greatness, then chaos enters the relationship. Ooh. Love and romance must struggle against the pathologos, right? So there is a kind of desire and even courage sometimes to fight against this inevitable destruction, but without the logos, it's kind of doomed to fail. So love and romance must be tied to the logos, the third member of our relationships. Or the distorting, if we don't, again, you're either one or the other. You're either logos or pathologos. Or the distorting power of the pathologos will dominate the relationship. So there always is a third member of our relationship. It's either the tyrannical master that treats us like slaves, or the true master that brings us up to self-mastership too. There's always a third person, just like we're always doing a dialectic, just like we're always doing analogy. The difference is whether you want to do it consciously and good, or you want to be a slave to the bad. Which is weird, because if we are here to develop learning, if we're here for any reason, it has to be for learning. You can't take your Bugattis and your titles with you out of this physical incarnation. So if we're here for anything, it has to be learning. But what's interesting is if we're not doing our learning, gaining that self-mastership, we've been talking of today, of the logos, of the dialectic, of analogy, then you are going to be having problems. In other words, the universe seems to be created such that you have to be doing what you're here for. You can't just sit on the sidelines, because you get the problems if you're sitting on the sidelines. So it's like a built-in safety mechanism to make sure you're doing your job, which is interesting. So our idea of, if you want a good relationship, make sure you add that third person, the logos. But actually what we just read is, by the way, that third person's always there anyway. Is that your choice is whether you want a good third person or a terrible one. In a strict sense, it should be clear that the family clan does not impose or force a particular belief on the subject, so the subject comes to a conclusion. It's a strange, wordless conclusion. Again, part of a slave. Slaves aren't told. Slaves don't get to talk. Children are to be seen and not heard. Bollocks. Use words. That's part of mastery. Why? Because mastery is literally mastery of the self-logos, which is, by definition, words. It is a conclusion. There we go. Pushing the implications to a conclusion. In other words, if you're not doing it consciously, you're doing it anyway. It's a wordless. So what's self-mastery? Let's put it on the board. So this self-mastery involves so let's say what is side A, words, conclusions, third member of relationships. But also we have what isn't, side B of the dialectic, what is not. Wordless. Again, conclusions. We play out the rest of the drama. Which means we would have to have an equivalent over here. We push the implications. For questions and insights. And a third member of the distorting power of the Pathologos will third member of relationships. And there's the quote. The quote is the distorting power of the Pathologos. Will dominate the relationship. So we have self-mastery on one side and slavery on the other side. So what we're saying, a wordless conclusion. We play out the rest of the drama. It's a third member of our relationships, especially most loving, most meaningful, most beautiful ones, because the distorting power of the Pathologos will dominate the relationship. Just as analogy with self-mastery, what are we learning with the mastery of the Logos? Mastery of words. How do we follow the Logos? Push the implications to generate questions and insights and come to conclusions. That's a big problem. Every Friday we read The Republic with Mindy's All About Platonism reading group. You can check that out. But sometimes we will have different opinions, and I'm very eager to come to a conclusion. Now, the times that we don't, sometimes Mindy will want to brush it off and say, oh, I think differently, or I have a different opinion, or it's not the time to talk about it now. Various ways of stopping the Logos. What happens is if we don't come to a conclusion, then the very next paragraph, which takes those conclusions and follow on, we can't do. And I'm always struggling with when she does that, because I'll say, you know how like we're in when we're in book 8, the fall of the aristocratic man to the timocratic man. So in the Republic, Socrates paints a picture of an aristocratic soul, which represents good soul, philosopher soul. Not the way we think of aristocracies today. The word means to be ruled by the most skilled, not the way it's corrupted, to be ruled by the powerful. So the philosopher king or aristocratic soul has wisdom, but doesn't address the injustices of his family, of his wife, of how his wife's talking to his son, and he falls. So that's a use of wisdom, but not a use of justice. He's not using his wisdom all the time to address injustices. Now, Mindy didn't want to make that conclusion. She said, well, I have a different opinion. And I was like, well, it says that in the text. Where are you different? Oh, I have a different opinion. I like it to be about music, judging states of mind. She really likes judging states of mind. But then the very next paragraph, we realize, oh, there's a principle here. Wisdom without justice falls. And then the timocratic soul has honor, but doesn't put wisdom in charge, so it falls again to the oligarchic soul. In other words, I was limited from being able to make that conclusion, make that next step, because we didn't come to a conclusion. One block to the Logos is not making conclusions. And we know what's a block to the Logos? Belief. I have a different belief. I have a different opinion. That's not understanding. So we need to make conclusions, otherwise we get stuck. I ended up making the conclusion anyway, and now that I have reflected in this way, I see the significance of what I was doing. I was trying to be polite, by silencing the logos. And that's so hopefully tomorrow, on the time of recording, I'll be able to express this to make a conclusion. I came to a conclusion of the significance of conclusions. Maybe I won't, because, you know, it's Mindy's thing, and unless she is also in this game where she can establish principles to follow when anything that comes up blocks the logos. If she doesn't want to do that, then, you know, then this will play out. But that will just be her thing in her group. Just because a group does this doesn't mean we can't do this over here. But we'll see. So, there are conclusions based on your pathologos, just as we need to make conclusions on our understanding, like I just talked about. We play out the rest of the drama, just as we need to push the implications when we do see a connection. Like that, what I saw there. So if the aristocratic soul falls in that way, maybe that principle would be the principle behind the fall of the next, and so on and so on. So pushing the implications. There will always be a third member of the relationship. So right now, just using an example, I'm talking about my relationship with Mindy in that reading group. Unless we establish the principles of the logos as a third member of that relationship, the distorting power of the pathologos will dominate the relationship. There's no way around it. Will have to do my best to do this and encourage her to do the same, and I don't know, be friendly and encouraging and patient. Unless there's something else I discover that will help show the significance of this, but I don't know, do my best to follow the logos and encourage others to do the same, and see what happens. So, analogy to discover what is true of self-mastery by learning what's true of the pathologos, which is the opposite of self-mastery. It's self-enslavement. So, strange wordless conclusion is a conclusion that tries to make sense of that very pathologos producing scene. So that's where we got it. There was that orchestrated injustice, orchestrated milieu and drama and roles so that you would make this conclusion. The lesson one learns from those scenes is that our guardians have power and authority over us. They don't. That's called self-slavery. The subject submits to slavery. The limits are set. A new reality must be acknowledged. Survival as a member of the family clan is, hey, if you're a slave to me, I will look after you. I'm a great tyrant. That's what a tyrant does. Look at my injustice, but I won't be mean to you, which is an appeal of Trump as well. Hey, look at how mean I am. I'm threatening to kill everyone on the left. I'm threatening to kill anyone who opposes me and threatening to deport all these people that I don't like, that I, by the way, exploit their labor for personal profit. But if you vote for me, maybe I'll be nice to you. So that's the game. That's the thing that he was doing. Survival as a member. Hey, I'm one of the team. See, I'm wearing the red hat. Please don't deport me. So the name of that in internet culture is a leopards ate my face. So I'm voting for the face-eating leopard party, the party of leopards who eat people's faces. But I hope that because I vote for them, they will allow me to be safe. I'll have survival within this group, and then they're always shocked when their face gets eaten. Oh no, the leopard-eating face party ate my face! And there's a whole subreddit based on that. This is the idea. Oh, this pathologos family clan that I am pledging my loyalty to is destroying my life and my relationships. But a kind of survival, a kind of sick survival, but maybe necessary for being a child, is assured. You have a role established, you have an identity gained. Everything that we see play out with the MAGA thing, the Trumpists, but also the Nazis and so on and so on. Why? Because it all has a root cause. In other words, it's all understandable and predictable, meaning we don't have to play it out again and again and again. Just as in chapter 1, Pierre saw the Nazis were playing out the same thing that the Romans had to deal with. We're not learning anything. But to learn means to find its cause, which means to find its principle, which means to follow the logos through the dialectical structure to find its cause that will be a paradigm. That's what we're reading. So this applies to all of us, all of our souls, when we're in our problem. It also applies to the Nazis. It also applies to the Trumpers. It also applies to the fascists. It also applies to why Kamala and Biden failed so terribly at addressing any problems. It's a universal paradigm, and it should also apply to your next incarnation, your next planet, your next species, whatever it is. So it's a kind of learning that would be eternal because it's paradigmatic. It's of a paradigm that exists in being. And by reflecting on it today, we pushed the implications. We pushed the implications. We generated new questions and insights. We used this logos as a third member of our relationship with the text. It's us, the text, and the logos. We came to these new conclusions. We used our words, and our conclusion was self-mastery. So we have a new way of understanding how we are reading. How are we reading? We're having the logos and dialectic as a third member of our reading relationship. We are doing our best to look for patterns and push the implications of those to generate more questions and insights. We come to conclusions using our words, and an example of that is we have understood that by reading in this way, we are practicing and developing self-mastery. By having relationships in this way, by talking to our soul, relating to ourselves in this way, we are developing self-mastery. If we don't, we are allowing the dominating power of the pathologos to take over our relationships. So the distorting power of the pathologos will dominate our relationships, dominate our reading groups, dominate our family, dominate our society, dominate our species. If we don't do this, because there's always that third member of our relationships, and it will wordlessly play out the rest of the drama and come to its inevitable conclusions, which were called tragic implications. That's the quote from the text. They spell tragic? No. The tragic implications. So what are we calling it? Slavery, not just slavery of our body, not just slavery of our football team, or whatever, anything else. It's self-slavery versus self-mastery. This is what we're learning when we're learning how to read. This is what happens if we don't. So, stay in the game. Become a master. Don't become a self-slave. Self-slavery to pathologos. False image and belief of self and reality. Reality involves all those other aspects: beauty, greatness, care, love. Self-slavery to the pathologos, false image of and belief of self and reality. So, play the game, stay in the game. If you don't, you are sacrificing. What was the word? You are submitting. The subject submits. So we can also say the quote, the subject, and by the way, subject to other, self to other, the subject submits. Don't submit to self-slavery. Read in this way. Have this in your relationships. Do this at all times. Stay in the game. Do your best. Find others in the game. Cherish them. Have coffee. practice talking or doing analogies based on this, and have fun. And join the Discord, comment on the YouTube video. If you want to follow along on Twitch, you can find a link up below so you can comment in real time. Thanks for our new viewers today and our new chatters. I hope you found this significant. I hope you found this curious. I hope you found this interesting and wondering. And I hope to see you next time, where we will go on to our next question, which is, teaser alert. Let us consider this further. Why didn't we reject the drama, call it a fiction, and reject it as unjust? So we've been talking about the conditions for this and the implications of this. Why didn't we just reject it? What happened? With that teaser for next time, I hope to see you. Hope you join us next time. Thank you so much for joining. Bye.